The evolution from the NES and Famicom to their super successors is something that a lot of series benefited greatly from, either being taken to new heights or continuing the high from their predecessors. Super Mario World is often debated between it and Super Mario Bros. 3 for which is the better game, but it says a lot considering both are some of the best regarded 2D platformers. Link to the Past took the obfuscating and frustrating elements of the first two entries into what I would argue is one of the best Legend of Zelda games outright, and befitting the trilogy of Nintendo franchises, the Metroid series got Super Metroid. Look, you can probably gauge my opinions of the game already, but as someone who hadn't played a Metroid game until a month ago, beating the first two was certainly interesting. NES-Troid had the framework for a great adventure had it not been for a now antiquated structure. Return of Samus already showed signs the developers were alleviating issues from the first game, it just wasn't all the way there. I can say in certain terms that Super Metroid continues in the direction of Metroid 2, though that would be massively underselling it, because Super Metroid is spectacular, and improves on so much that it needs a video like this. Let's get into it. Oh, just before we start however, did you know that everyone but Jerry is subscribed to my channel? Jerry's a cool guy. He grows his own oregano. Be like Jerry and join him. The subscribe part, not the oregano part. Okay, maybe the oregano part. Right, feel free to disagree if this is controversial, but I don't think the title screens to Metroid 1 and 2 are that good.
Yeah, I said it, what of it, bitch?
Now, rather than the single image of a title screen, or perhaps even a wall of text, Super Metroid is like one of the best openings to a game I've seen. The droning spacey synths, in conjunction with a pan across a dark room, immediately builds tension and curiosity, but what interrupts this are the cries of a familiar alien. And as the camera pans out from a Metroid confined to a capsule while the synthesizer starts to blare faster like a heartbeat, simultaneous to the revelation and juxtaposition of dead scientists at the foot of the machine, then the game's iconic theme hits. The tension is resolved, successfully built up into that of intrigue and dread. But yeah, this is honestly such a stark difference from what the first two games were. Though this likely is greatly assisted by the new hardware, the intro elicits such a wonderful sense of mystery that had me hooked from the beginning. The introduction of the game is one that puts the player up to speed fairly quickly, had they not played the first two entries. In the first game, Samus was able to take out the hardest enemy in the series and Mother Brain, whilst in the sequel, Samus took out Metroids on their home planet bar a single baby that she donated to scientists to study on. Let's see how that works out for them. So Samus returns to the scientist station to discover that they've developed a small case of being mutilated, and the culprit is none other than Ridley, who steals the baby Metroid and disappears as the space station begins to self-destruct. Once you escape, it's clear that Samus has to go and take back the baby Metroid. As opposed to the cold opens of its predecessors, Super Metroid is quite narrative driven relatively. It fills in a lot of holes to connect events in a more congruent manner, with this prologue also serving as a way to showcase just how much better Super Metroid already is. Immediately, the first thing you probably notice is the sprite work. I'm an admitted sucker for pixel art, but despite this game being 5 years older than I, it has aged far better than I ever will. Well, I've made myself sad now. Samus's sprite is brilliant. While I don't necessarily think a sprite in NES-Troid is bad, the attention to detail and increased colour palette really gave the artists far more to work with. The animation of her walk cycle is also brilliant. Both Metroid 1 and 2's Samus has a 3-frame walk cycle, which isn't a bad thing by any means. It's a clever preservation of cartridge space. Yet with the upgraded hardware, Samus now has an 11-frame walk cycle, providing many more through frames that captures the stride of a bounty hunter. It's mwah. Then there's the environment design, which you can see the level of detail in everything. It's night and day from the original two games. And the music and sound design are top notch. While you don't get a massive sample in the early section alone, it lets you know full well that the game is going to be something special. You'll also hear the music throughout the video because it makes for fantastic background noise. You'll also hear it in my other two videos. It's surprisingly hard to score the first two games on their own soundtracks, as it's very chiptune and quite abrasive, whereas here it's like a borderline masterpiece. But after Ceres' space station explodes, Samus makes her way to planet Zebes is the setting for NES-Troid. And might I say, the opening is handled tremendously too. Look, there's going to be a lot of praise here, just let me ramble into the computer for 150 people. If you were to explore every area at the beginning, bar where you can actually access, you have this wall you later will be able to run through, this ledge too tall to jump on, this area you can't roll under, etc. It mitigates your access so you're unable to get lost. Thus, on this direct path, you end up back in Torian, the final area of the first game. Then, the door you entered closes off behind you to ensure you get the items necessary before leaving. This also doubles up with returning to the opening area of Brinstar from NES-Troid, with it being nearly identical to the original layout. The morphing ball is where it was, the second room through the door has similar destructible blocks, which now is home to a set of missiles. Once you've got both, Torian becomes infested with enemies, but you can return from where you once came. After all this, the game then opens up to your own discretion. One of my main criticisms from previous games came in the confusing layout, because if you're like me, you'll probably take the longest path to eventually come across what you needed. In streamlining the initial stages, it demonstrates the open-endedness of the world without allowing the player to wander off and get lost, whilst also giving an item progression that leaves more tools at Samus's disposal. Like, fuck, it's just such a well thought out introduction. Leaving this area doesn't immediately make Super Metroid open world per se, more so the game breadcrumbs the structure in this locale before leaving it to your choice. You have to find the bombs before you can expand your options. Criteria at this point effectively serves as a microcosm for what lies ahead. So now, the main aim of the game is exploration. Likewise to the series' core, you can only access the final part of the game by taking out 4 bosses scattered around Zebes: Ridley, Phantoon, Dragon, and a toad-looking thing called Kraid. Expectedly, a lot of these enemies are sequestered deep into Zebes, inaccessible without a lot of upgrades. It's nothing new from what the first 2 games laid as a foundation, except it's done so much better in my mind. Right, where do I start? I think the biggest thing I love as a general quality of life improvement is the map feature. When you pause the game, you're able to see the area you're in as well as Samus's status. Immediately, this makes your position and knowledge much more user-friendly. It doesn't necessarily show everything, it doesn't detail what doors are locked in which way, but I cannot describe how useful it is to just have this at your convenience. Although this doesn't actually tell the full story of the map's usefulness. In effect, it's designed to remedy my biggest issue with the first 2 games: Crypticness. Compare these squares of map. The thick white border surrounding these walls are a clear indicator for what is a wall, with no uncertainty. Then, compare that to this square. You find it in a room that seems closed off, but the lack of a white border indicates this isn't the case. So after a bit of investigation, you're in another area. Not every example in the game is like this, but the use of map functionality discerning where to investigate is magnificent. Next are the extra utility rooms. Save points returned from Metroid 2, albeit here they're in dedicated areas. Then there's some extra rooms for player convenience. Occasionally you'll find places to recharge your energy and or your missiles, along with a room with full map data of the area. The former are in an easy and open room to access, whilst the latter may take an extra step or 2 to locate, which I'd say maximises player experience. As time goes on, I sort of think, man, grinding in Metroid was tedious as shit, because really, you'd likely try to get to a room or boss at maximum health. No gameplay is inhibited by removing that. While I think Super Metroid could go further with user-friendliness, it's still far more forgiving. On top of this, the additional challenge to circumnavigate an area in order to be rewarded with an incredibly useful feature is a lovely cherry on top. The means to access a lot of facilities in Super Metroid are superb in design. One of the most refined improvements is with the world layout. In Super Metroid, it harkens back to the first game style, requiring the player to venture back and forth from everywhere. The difference being that Super Metroid is much more accustomed to this, because unlike NES-Troid more or less requiring only a few items, Super Metroid intersperses its world, even as early as 15 minutes in, with obstacles you won't get past for a while. Early game Brinstar has a door that can only be opened with a power bomb. In my recordings, I didn't get them for about 2 hours. Then there's also tiles to grab onto with this grappling hook, which is another item I didn't get until much later. This is consistent throughout, which necessitates backtracking. The philosophy works twofold in a Metroidvania. Firstly, as you begin much more insignificant than how you finish, returning to areas you might have struggled with and just absolutely crushing is satisfying, on top of the fulfillment of knowing you've explored in an area now in its entirety. Secondly, and this is a big one, new power-ups or developments often give the player a shortcut, enhancing navigation even more. The big one I can think of as an obvious example is when you access the eastern part of Criteria. With the Super Dash, you get to break down this wall to get to where your ship is. Though there's a more direct hint at a shortcut in that case, there are shortcuts throughout Super Metroid's setting which do a great job in allowing players to venture however they see fit. The layout complements the gradual succession of Samus obtaining more power-ups really well, which only magnifies that sense of acquired strength. If the layout is independent to the items you gain, or the items aren't particularly useful, then the progression would feel much more superficial. Fortunately, this isn't the case with either, as the items are pretty great too. Let's see, there's 5 different types of beams, 2 suit upgrades, basic items like bombs and missiles, a better variant of both, the morph ball that can be upgraded into a spring ball, a high jump that can be upgraded to a space jump, a speed booster to run fast, a grappling beam for manoeuvring across ceilings and walls, and an X-ray scope to survey an area and see if there's any hidden passageways. Look, I admire the first 2 games, but the concept of having to put an ice beam near the end of each game because the player might not have it, assuming the wave beam is an upgrade, and then look like an idiot on youtube.com is certainly a choice. Here, nearly all beam varieties compound on each other. You're able to turn them off at your own accord, yet now you have them all simultaneously without a late stage section that basically says, did you get rid of the ice beam? Yeah, sorry about that. Beyond that, I don't have a whole lot to say about items. All make Samus feel gradually more powerful, whilst the X-ray scope helps minimise much crypticness. The inclusion of all these enhance exploration. Furthermore, enemies have seen a decent upgrade of sorts. Some of the minor ones really caught me off guard when I wasn't expecting it, though generally the rest are just fodder to temporarily stop you, which is all they need to be. The colour range gives these creatures more life and distinction, as well as reflecting the environment they're in. Norfair enemies are on fire, the ship enemies are the spacey alien electrical type, it all works. The bosses were somewhat lacking in the first 2 games, but every single one here is a hit. No longer is it necessarily a shoot as many times as you can and win approach. It instead requires a bit of strategy for every one. For instance, Kraid evolved considerably from the first game. Literally, he's a big boy now. You have to dodge his projectiles and shoot in his mouth when it opens to get him down. Phantoon was probably my least favourite of the 4 main bosses because I could never get a feel for dodging it, although that's ultimately my problem. Dragon was an interesting case. If it spits on you, it drains your life away considerably, so a lot of challenging yet fair dodging and shooting is needed. But come on, my favourite is Ridley. There's no particular gimmick to Ridley, you just need to be the better of the 2. Its attack patterns are rather consistent and manageable, but the tail does monstrous damage. It's the most challenging and rewarding of the 4 major bosses. Though the other bosses are good too, like, fuck, this game is so good, man. I've spent a little while just fawning over Super Metroid, and for good reason. It's a fantastic game. But is it a perfect game? It's important to know where to improve, and there's a few hang-ups I have with Super Metroid that vary from personal taste to personal issue. I've spoken about how Crypticness was taken with expert care. Unfortunately, there are a few times where, despite improvements, I couldn't tell where to go. I'm more willing to forgive Super Metroid, as if you consider how much I needed outside help from the other 2 games to this, it's minimal by comparison. Accessing Meridia by powerbombing this glass tank with no real hint to do so though? That's fucked up. Samus's control is great throughout, tight and mostly responsive, but emphasis on mostly. Sometimes wall jumps felt a little imprecise, as well as when you're in this quicksand section of Meridia. To its credit, you feel like you're in quicksand, but you go from super expert space hunter that kills enemies in one shot to a whittle baby bitch that can't leave 2 feet of wet dirt. Get it together, Samus. Rotating through the items can on occasion be quite cumbersome, especially when you need to quickly go between regular missiles and a beam shot. What I find interesting is that you can turn off like every upgrade, yet you can't turn off super missiles or power bombs. So you press select once to use a missile, then 5 times to get back to a normal shot. Hopefully a future entry manages to handle it so you can easily switch from shots. Lastly, this isn't to do with the game's content so much, but Christ, it is my biggest issue with Super Metroid. The crunch culture of the development is really something else. There's an article about 2 developers discussing it before the game's release, and it's legitimately sad. How the staff were working on Christmas while getting angry over seeing other people being able to celebrate, or how they would have a sleeping room to nap in, which got to the point they were working so hard they forgot when they last slept. And then they just laugh it off. Please, for the love of God, whoever you are, even if you're a 13-year-old die-hard Luca fan, join a union. Then also like and subscribe please, thank you. But if you're able to look beyond a few dodgy mechanics and proletariat exploitation, then Super Metroid is a pretty near perfect adventure game. So let's wrap it up. The defeat of the 4 main bosses opens up a very familiar finishing sequence to Super Metroid. It's near identical to the final moments of any Droid, albeit a few moments are different. For one, shooting Mother Brain and dealing with the worst enemies ever is actually pretty straightforward. Although, there's a little more to it when Mother Brain decides to just transform into a major beast that occasionally fires a rainbow laser, but overall isn't too bad. What is quite bad, however, is my heart, and only partially because of my blood pressure. Preceding the fight, Samus faces off against a few Metroid, it's rudimentary stuff, until a big boy comes into play and nearly kills Samus before squeaking and disappearing. It only reappears at the end to save Samus stuck in a pinch from Mother Brain, at which moment, if you haven't figured it out already, it's the baby from Metroid 2. So it's pretty cool to have a nice wholesome ending where you and your effective pet can escape the planet together and fight for oh, it's dead. Sure, I then get the Hyper Beam and absolutely annihilate Mother Brain for one more time. But dude, that legitimately made me so sad to see the Metroid die. For 3 games, through thick and thin, I had to fight against them, yet I could only be sad at the death of my best friend. Didn't have a name, but I cherished them, alright? After the destruction of Mother Brain for a second time, it's the escape sequence. There are 2 endings, and I did already know about it going into it, so of course I'm going to save the animals. I don't know what they're called, and actually, I didn't even meet these 3 in my journey, but they seem alright, so I best get going. So finally, in a very fitting ending, the original Metroid trilogy closes off with a bang. It's probably clear to you that if I rank the original Metroid trilogy, Super Metroid is, at the very least, in 3rd place. Maybe it'll move up, who knows. Fantastic presentation, an improved setting, much more engaging means to explore, a smoother gradient in becoming a stronger character, not a single bad boss. You can very much understand why Super Metroid is the benchmark for Metroidvanias. But rather than just leaving it there, let's pose the question. Can any game top it? Metroid Fusion is next, and I'm intrigued to see the series' direction. It's series, not series. God damn it.
Hello, it's me, the internet boy. It is currently, as of my voiceover, 10 to 1 in the morning. I am trying my best to get this out as soon as possible. And I will just say, you people have bested me. I've had too many nice comments to the point that I wouldn't be able to fit them all at this head screen in time. So I'm just very thankful and very humbled by the support. We're almost at 200 subscribers. I can't believe it. I'm going to have a nap to celebrate. And I will catch up with you soon. Take care.